The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and waiting at my front door just before noon. I carried it into my kitchen in Phoenix, Arizona, opened it at Helen's dining table, and saw my own son's name on the first page. Ryan Carter, plaintiff. Olivia Carter, plaintiff. And me, Daniel Carter, 70 years old, retired architect, widower, father, was the man they were suing for $600,000. I read the number twice. Then I set the papers down and did not touch my coffee again. That was the kind of silence that tells you something has already broken. Tell me honestly, what would you think if your own child did that? I had spent more than 4 decades as an architect. That kind of work teaches you something simple. A weak foundation always shows itself, sometimes late. Never, never. That was what I kept thinking as I stared at those papers. Not the amount, not even the accusation, the foundation, because a lawsuit like that does not begin in a courtroom. It begins much earlier, when one person starts mistaking help for duty. I had lived alone since my wife Helen passed away. The house in Phoenix went quiet after that, but I stayed because it still felt like the place we had built together. Ryan was our only child. I raised him. I paid for his college. Later, when he married Olivia, I wrote the biggest check of my life outside a mortgage. $45,000 for their wedding. I did it because he was my son. I did it because Helen would have wanted that day to be good for him. And I did it without keeping score. That was my first mistake. I should have understood that sooner. Ryan was 39 when all this began. He worked in commercial real estate. He knew money. He knew presentation. He knew how to walk into a room and speak as if things were already settled. Olivia had the same kind of confidence. Polished, pleasant, careful. The kind of woman who could say something sharp and make it sound like advice. For the first few years of their marriage, I tried to stay respectful. I did not pry. I did not interfere. If Ryan needed help, he asked. If he did not, I let him be a grown man. At least that was what I believed. Then one afternoon, Ryan called me and sounded almost boyish. "Dad," he said, "I've got good news." "What kind of good news?" "We bought a house." There was a pause before I answered. "A house?" "In Scottsdale," he said. "A big one. You need to come see it." He sounded excited, and for a moment I was too. So I told him I would come. When I drove out to Scottsdale, I already knew the neighborhood was expensive, but knowing it and seeing it were different things. The homes sat far back from the road. The landscaping looked planned, not planted. Everything on that street said the same thing. Money lives here. Ryan met me outside with a wide smile. Olivia came out a second later. "Daniel," she said, kissing my cheek. "What do you think?" I looked up at the house again. "I think it's large." Ryan laughed. "Come on, Dad, just wait until you see inside." The place was beautiful. High ceilings, open rooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of kitchen people show off without pretending otherwise. I walked through it slowly, noticing stonework, lines, finish quality, and all the details I had noticed in buildings my life. And all the while, something kept pressing at the back of my mind. This was not just a house. This was a statement. We ended up in the kitchen. Ryan leaned against the island. Olivia folded her arms and smiled, but the smile sat a little too still on her face. Ryan said, "So the mortgage is bigger than we wanted." I said nothing. He kept going. "The monthly costs are high, taxes too." Olivia added, "It's a lot at once." I looked from one to the other. That was the moment the visit changed. Ryan was not showing me a house. He was staging a conversation. I asked, "How high is high?" Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. "It's just tighter than expected." Olivia said, "We can manage it, but it would help if there was more room." There are moments when you can feel a trap closing before anyone says the actual words. This was one of them. Then Ryan said it. "You've got close to $2 million in retirement, Dad." I looked at him. He did not look away. He said, "If you helped us with $300,000, it would take a lot of pressure off." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. $300,000? "It makes sense," he said. "It's not like we're asking for all of it." Olivia stepped in before I answered. "In my family," she said, "parents help their children build a stable life. That's just what family does." There it was. Not gratitude. Expectation. I set my hand on the counter and kept my voice even. "That money is my retirement," I said. "I worked my whole life for it." Ryan's expression changed almost at once. The warmth left first. Then the patience. "You'd still have plenty left," he said. "That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point is that I did not spend 40 years working so I could fund a house you chose before you could afford it." The kitchen went still. Olivia's face tightened. Ryan stared at me, and I could see the anger rise in him. So you're saying no? Yes, I said. I am. He laughed once, but there was nothing amused about it. Unbelievable. I said, Ryan, you asked. I answered. He stepped away from the island. No, Dad. I came to you because I thought you'd understand. I do understand. Then act like it. That was the moment I saw something I had not wanted to see before. My son did not think he was asking for help. He thought he was collecting on something. Maybe I was wrong, but it didn't feel right. Olivia said, you know parents want their children to do better than they did. I do want that, I said. That is not the same as underwriting bad decisions. Ryan pointed toward the front of the house. It's an investment. Then it should stand on its own. His voice rose. You always helped when it mattered. I helped when you needed help. This is not the same thing. It is to me. And there it was again. Not need. Entitlement. I picked up my keys. Ryan looked stunned. You're leaving? Yes. That's it? That's it. Olivia said, Daniel, I think you're making this emotional. I looked at her. No, I said. I think I'm making it clear. Then I walked out. I did not slam the door. I drove back to Phoenix with both hands on the wheel and one thought that would not leave me. Something had shifted, and not in a small way. That was when I realized this was not about money alone. In the days after that visit, Ryan did not call to cool down. He did not apologize. Instead, I got silence. A hard kind. The kind people use when they want you to feel the distance and fix it yourself. I did not. Still, I kept replaying that afternoon. The kitchen. The mortgage. The way he mentioned my retirement savings as if he had already counted them in his own plans. The way Olivia spoke about what family does. And the more I thought about it, the more one question kept returning. Had they already decided what my role was before I ever walked into that house? Would you have trusted him after that? A week later, the answer came to my door in legal language. The lawsuit said Ryan and Olivia had suffered financial harm because I had led them to believe I would help them buy the house. It claimed my past financial support had created a reasonable expectation. Reasonable expectation. I said those words out loud in my kitchen. Then I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the only alternative is to put your fist through a wall. They were saying that because I had been a generous father before, I was now financially bound to remain one forever. They were turning every act of love backward and using it as evidence. That cut deeper than the number on the page. I sat down and read every line. Then I read it again. The papers felt heavy in my hands. That would matter later. At the end of the first hour, I understood one thing clearly. Ryan was not trying to persuade me anymore. He was trying to force me, and that changed everything. Part 2. The next morning I called a lawyer. His name was Michael Bennett. A careful man, steady voice, no wasted words. When I told his office I needed to see him about a civil suit filed by my son and daughter-in-law, there was a short silence on the line. Then the receptionist said, Mr. Bennett can meet you this afternoon. I brought the papers with me. Michael read them at his desk without interrupting me once. When he finished the first few pages, he looked up. Did you ever promise them money for this house? No. Did you ever suggest you might? No. Did you discuss contributing before they bought it? No. He leaned back slightly. Good, he said, because if that's true, this case is weak. I asked, weak enough to go away? He said, weak cases still cost time and money. People file them anyway. He set the papers down and tapped one page. They're building their argument around a pattern, he said. College, wedding, prior support. They want to say you trained him to expect financial help. I raised my son, I said. I didn't train a customer. Michael gave the smallest nod. That distinction matters. We'll make it clear. He asked me to walk him through everything in order. So I did. My work as an architect. My retirement. Helen's death. Raising Ryan. Helping with college. Paying for the wedding. The phone call about the Scottsdale house. The tour. The ask. The refusal. The silence. As I spoke, Michael wrote notes. He stopped me only when something had to be precise. What exact amount did Ryan request? 300,000. And the suit asks for 600,000. Yes. He looked up again. That matters too. Why? Because it suggests this is not about recovering a specific promise. It may be about pressure. That was a polite word for it. The process of defending myself began, and very quickly I learned something unpleasant. Truth is clean. Litigation is not. Once the case moved forward, every act of kindness I had ever shown Ryan was taken out, measured, and described as if it were part of a contract. The tuition payments, the wedding money, the support after Helen died, all of it. Their side wanted to argue that I had created a custom of financial rescue, as if fatherhood were a subscription service. During the early preparation, Michael asked a question I had not thought to ask. What had Ryan told other people before he asked you? I don't know. We should find out. That line became important, because the more we looked, the more the story changed. It turned out Ryan had spoken to friends and colleagues before he ever approached me. Not after. Before. And according to those statements, he had already been saying his father would be contributing money toward the house. Not maybe. Would. When Michael told me that, I sat very still in his office. He slid a page across the desk. I read it once. Then again. So he told people it was happening, I said. Yes. Before he asked me. Yes. That answer landed hard, because it meant the confrontation in that kitchen had not been a difficult conversation he hoped would go well. It had been a collection attempt on a promise I had never made. He had built the decision first. Then he tried to force reality to catch up. I asked Michael, does that help us? It helps show assumption, not agreement. That phrase stayed with me. Assumption, not agreement. The whole case rested there. Ryan had decided what he was entitled to, and then treated my refusal as wrongdoing. At one point, Michael asked if I wanted to attempt an early settlement. I looked at him for a long moment. What exactly would I be settling? He answered carefully. Sometimes people pay something to end the process, even when they're right. I'm not paying my son because he sued me for refusing to finance his house. Michael nodded once. Then we proceeded. The further we got, the uglier it became. I would sit across from Michael while he explained filings, arguments, timelines, all the things that turn personal betrayal into numbered exhibits. I learned to carry copies of papers I never wanted to see. The complaint, the response, the supporting records. The papers became a motif of their own. Every time I held them, they seemed to say the same thing. This is what happens when respect leaves a family. About a month into the process, Michael called me in and shut the door before he sat down. There's more, he said. I remember the way he said it. Flat, controlled. That usually meant none of it would be good. What more? We've been looking into their financial position. I assumed the mortgage was heavy. It is. But that isn't the whole problem. He showed me what his investigation had uncovered. Olivia had spent tens of thousands of dollars on designer clothes. There had been a new car. There had been travel, large personal spending before the house purchase. Not after. Before. I kept my eyes on the page longer than I needed to. Not because I did not understand it. Because I did. I said, so they weren't strained by necessity. Michael answered, they were strained by choices. Then came the next piece. Ryan's income had fallen. His work in commercial real estate had been weakening. The money coming in was not what it had been. So now the picture was clearer and worse. They had spent heavily. They had bought a house above their means. Ryan had already told people I would help. Then, when I refused, they did not adjust. They sued. That was when I stopped asking myself whether this had gotten out of hand. It had been out of hand from the beginning. Maybe you see it differently. But where I come from, that is not a misunderstanding. That is a plan. One evening, after a long meeting, I asked Michael something I had avoided. Have you seen this before? Family money disputes? Yes. More than I'd like. And? He folded his hands on the desk. The money is rarely the whole issue. I said nothing. He continued. Sometimes it's resentment. Sometimes dependency. Sometimes people convince themselves that access to someone else's savings is part of love. I let that sit. Then I said, he didn't even ask like a son. Michael looked at me. No, he said. He asked like a claimant. That line stayed with me longer than any legal explanation. The process wore on. It takes time for people to gather records, take statements, sharpen arguments. Too much time. Enough time for anger to cool and become something heavier. Ryan and I had no real father-son conversation during that stretch. When we did communicate, it passed through lawyers or came in writing. Papers again. Once, there was a direct exchange outside a procedural meeting. He stood in the hallway in a suit that cost more than it should have. Olivia stood beside him, silent for once. Ryan said, "You're really going through with this." I almost smiled at that. "I'm going through with defending myself." He shook his head. "You could end this. You could have avoided it." Olivia cut in. "You know this is hurting everyone." I looked at her. "You should have thought about that before filing." Ryan's face hardened. "So you'll spend all this money just to make a point?" I answered, "No. I'll spend it so the truth has a record. Nobody said anything after that. But I remember the look Ryan gave me. Not shame, just anger that I had not yielded. Would you have stayed quiet at that point? Because that was the pressure beneath all of it. Be reasonable, Dad. Be generous, Dad. Absorb the damage, Dad. Keep the peace by paying for the peace. I had done enough of that in life to know where it leads. Straight to more of the same. As the case moved toward trial, Michael prepared me for testimony. He said, "Answer only what is asked. Keep it simple. Don't argue." I told him, "I'm too old to start performing now." He actually smiled at that. "Good," he said. "Then just tell the truth." I could do that. The truth was not complicated. I had loved my son. I had helped him. I had not promised him money for that house. And he had sued me because he believed I should help him whether I wanted to or not. Once you stripped away the paperwork, that was the whole case. And yet the closer we got to court, the more I felt something colder building underneath. Not fear. The sense that I was about to hear my son explain me as a resource instead of a father. And I was not sure which part would hurt more. Part 3. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not only in temperature, in tone, in the way voices drop and shoes sound different on polished floors. Michael met me outside the courtroom with a file tucked under his arm. More papers. Always papers. He said, "You ready?" "No," I told him. "But I'm here." "That's enough." Ryan and Olivia were already there when we entered. They sat together at their table, close enough to look united, far enough to look careful. Ryan did not smile at me. Olivia gave me one brief glance, and then looked away. I took my seat beside Michael and set my hands flat on the table. Then the hearing began. Their lawyer tried to frame the case as broken reliance, a son and daughter-in-law making major financial choices because they believed support would come, a pattern of generosity that had created expectation, a father withdrawing help at a critical moment. When you hear it said that way, stripped clean and polished for a courtroom, it almost sounds reasonable. That is the danger of selective truth. It can wear a respectable suit. My testimony came first. Michael led me through the background. My work, my retirement, my wife's death, my son, the support I had given him over the years, college, wedding, general help when it was needed. Then he asked, "Did you ever promise Ryan Carter money toward the Scottsdale home?" "No." "Did you tell him you would contribute $300,000? "No." "Did you authorize him to rely on your retirement funds for that purchase?" "No." "Why did you decline his request?" "Because it was my retirement," I said, "and because I believed he had bought a house he could not afford." Then their lawyer cross-examined me. He was polished. The kind of man who asks the same question 3 ways, hoping one answer will slip. "Mr. Carter, you love your son, correct?" "Yes." "You have financially supported him in the past?" "Yes." "You paid for his education?" "Yes." "You paid $45,000 for his wedding?" "Yes." "And you wanted him to succeed?" "Of course." He nodded like we were building something together. Then he said, "So is it fair to say your son had reason to believe you might support him in buying a family home?" I answered, "No." He paused. "No, no. Because hoping is not the same as being promised." The other lawyer tried again. "Would you agree that your history of generosity influenced his expectations?" I would agree that his expectations were his own responsibility. That changed the air in the room. The case sounded less like reliance after that, and more like presumption. Ryan testified after me. That was harder than I expected. Not because he was convincing, because he was my son, and I could still hear the boy he had been underneath the man he had become. He spoke about growing up with support. He spoke about my history of helping. He spoke about assuming I would want to see him stable and secure. He spoke about the pressure of the home loan. He tried to sound reasonable. In another setting, maybe he would have. But facts have a way of narrowing a performance. Michael questioned him carefully. Not loudly. That was his strength. He never seemed emotional. He simply removed places to hide. "Mr. Carter," Michael said, "before you asked your father for $300,000, did you tell others he would be contributing?" Ryan shifted in his seat. "I may have said I expected he would help. That wasn't my question. Did you tell friends and colleagues he would be contributing?" Ryan hesitated. "Yes." "Before you asked him?" A pause. "Yes." There it was. I felt something settle inside me then. Not relief. Recognition. The truth had finally spoken in the room where it mattered. Michael continued. "So at the time you made those statements, your father had not agreed to provide funds." Ryan's jaw tightened. No. And despite that, you moved forward with a purchase at that price point. Yes. Why? Ryan took a breath. Because I believed he would help. On what basis? Because he always had. That line hung there. And in a way, it explained everything and nothing. He always had. So now he must. That was the logic. Not law. Not contract. Not promise. Habit. Mistaken for obligation. I still wonder what you would have done hearing that from your own child. Olivia testified too. She was composed. She spoke about family norms, support, shared success, the way parents help children establish security. Michael asked her about spending records, designer clothes, the new car, travel expenses. Her voice changed then. Not much, but enough. She said those purchases did not mean they were not under pressure. Michael replied, no one said they weren't under pressure. The question is whether they created some of it themselves. The judge looked down at the documents. Again, papers, bank records, statements, timelines. The paper trail said what pride would not. Their problem had not appeared out of nowhere. It had been assembled step by step. Then came the moment that mattered most. Michael asked Ryan directly, why did you sue your father? Ryan looked tired by then, less confident. But he answered, because I believed he had an obligation to help me. Not hoped, not thought, believed. Obligation. There it was in open court, clean and damaging. That was when I knew the case had turned. Not because of drama, because of clarity. The hearing continued. Arguments were made. Timelines reviewed. Michael emphasized what had been true from the start. Past generosity does not create a legal duty to finance future choices. No promise had been made. No commitment had been authorized. Ryan and Olivia had acted on assumption. More than that, they had acted after telling others a contribution was already coming. Decision before discussion. Outcome before agreement. That was not reliance. That was self-serving planning. During a break, Ryan passed close to me in the hallway. For a moment, I thought he might say something human. Instead, he said, "You're enjoying this?" I turned and looked at him. "No," I said. "I'm surviving it." He scoffed. "You could have stopped all this." I held his gaze. "No, Ryan. You could have." He started to say something else, but his lawyer called his name, and he walked away. Even then, with the case slipping, he was still arranging responsibility so it landed anywhere but on him. Back inside, the final arguments closed. Then came the ruling. The judge stated that I had never promised money for the home purchase. There was no enforceable commitment. Prior acts of support did not create legal obligation for this transaction. The claim failed. The case was dismissed. And because the lawsuit lacked merit, Ryan and Olivia were ordered to pay my legal fees. I heard the words clearly, but I did not feel triumph. What I felt was heavier than that, because winning against strangers is one thing, winning against your own son in court is another. Michael leaned toward me and said quietly, "It's over." I looked at the papers on the table, the complaint that had started it, the response that answered it, the records that exposed it, the ruling that ended it, all of it stacked neatly, like betrayal can be organized if you use enough clips. And that was when I understood something I had been resisting. The lawsuit had never really been only about getting money from me. It had been about forcing me to accept his version of my duty. The court rejected that version, but the damage it revealed was real. You decide. And once you see that clearly, there is no going back to pretending nothing happened. Part 4. After the ruling, I expected silence. In a sense, I got it. Ryan did not call. Olivia did not call. There was no apology outside the courtroom. They left, and I left, and the matter was legally finished. But some endings are only paperwork. The personal part takes longer. Michael and I went back to his office to close out what remained. He was more relaxed than I had seen him in months. He reviewed the practical details, fee recovery, final filings, administrative cleanup. I listened, signed what needed signing, and thought we were finished. Then Michael stopped. "There's one more thing," he said. His tone had changed. "Not legal now. Careful." I looked at him. "What kind of thing?" He folded his hands once, then unfolded them. "Something your wife arranged before she passed." That got my attention faster than anything else he could have said. "Helen?" "Yes." He opened a separate folder and drew out another document. "A trust," he said, "for Ryan." I stared at him. "How much?" $500,000. For a moment, I did not speak. Then I asked, "Why am I hearing about this now?" "Because of the conditions," he said. I sat back. There are few things stranger than discovering your late wife still has a move left in the story. What conditions? Michael slid the page toward me. I read them once. Then again, Ryan could receive the money only if he had reached 40, only if he was not bankrupt, only if he had not sued family members, and only if he had reconciled with his father. I put the paper down very slowly. Helen had always been a thoughtful woman, quiet but not passive. She saw people clearly, sometimes more clearly than they liked. And in that moment, sitting in Michael's office, I could almost hear her voice. Help means nothing if it protects the wrong lesson. I asked Michael, did Ryan know? No. Olivia? No. I looked back at the trust document. It felt different from the other papers. The lawsuit papers had accused. The court papers had defended. These papers revealed. They told me something Helen had understood before either Ryan or I fully did. Money without character can become a weapon. Michael said your wife was very specific. That sounds like Helen. He allowed himself a small smile. She wanted the money to help him only if he had become the kind of man who could handle it. I let out a breath and looked at the wall behind him. Helen had not set aside money to make Ryan comfortable. She had set it aside to mean something. And at that point, after the lawsuit, he had failed every condition but age. The worst part was realizing Helen had seen the risk long before I admitted it to myself. I had been helping Ryan in the moment. She had been thinking about the man he was becoming. On the drive back to Phoenix, I did not turn on the radio. A few weeks later, Ryan called. That was the first direct call in a long time. I looked at his name before answering. Then I picked up. What is it, Ryan? He did not bother with small talk. Did you know about the trust? There it was. So he had found out. Yes, I said. A pause. When were you going to tell me? When there was something to tell. His voice tightened. So you just sat on it? No, your mother set conditions. You failed them. Silence. Then he said, that's cold. I looked out through my kitchen window. No, I said. Suing your father was cold. He exhaled hard. That money was from Mom. Yes, it was for me. It was for you under certain conditions. He spoke through clenched restraint. This is unbelievable. I answered, you've used that word before. He did not like that. I could hear it. So what, that's it. I lose everything because of one mistake? I said, you did not make one mistake, Ryan. You made a series of choices. That was the closest we came to a real conversation then. Because he was still arguing from loss, not responsibility. Before ending the call, he asked, did you ever plan to help me at all? I took a second before answering. Yes, I said, when help would have helped. Then I ended the call. Would you have done anything different there? I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that call, looking at the trust papers beside the court papers. One set had defended me. The other had measured my son. Together, they said the same thing. Ryan could not be rescued into becoming better. He had to choose it. That was a hard thing for a father to accept, because every instinct tells you to reach in and soften the blow. But some blows are the lesson. Some losses are the first honest thing that has happened in years. I hated that truth. I also knew it was true. So when the reports of the divorce, the lost house, and the apartment reached me, I did not chase him. I waited. You tell me, was I supposed to interrupt that lesson again? I had done that many times before and it showed. For a while after that, I heard pieces of his life from a distance. The marriage broke down. Ryan and Olivia divorced. The Scottsdale house was lost. He ended up in a rental apartment. Nothing about that surprised me by then. When a life is built on pressure, image, and borrowed certainty, collapse does not usually arrive all at once. It comes in stages. 2 years passed. Time does something useful if you let it. It removes performance from the room. And one afternoon, Ryan came to see me in Phoenix. He looked older, not in years, in weight. The expensive confidence was gone. He stood at my door with both hands visible and none of the old polish left in his voice. Dad, he said. I let him in. We sat at the same dining table where I had first opened the lawsuit papers. That mattered to me. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked down and nodded once. I was wrong, he said. I did not rush to answer. People say those words for many reasons. I wanted to hear the rest. He continued. About the house, about the lawsuit, about all of it. I said, go on. He rubbed his hands together once. I thought you were supposed to save me from my own choices. That line landed harder than I expected. Because it was honest. He looked up. When you refused, I told myself you were turning your back on me. That made it easier to blame you. I asked, And now? Now I know you were forcing me to face what I'd done. He took a breath, and Olivia and I were living way past what we could carry. No excuses. No blame sharing. Just truth. Then he said, when I found out what Mom did with the trust, I finally understood it. I watched him carefully. Understood what? That help means nothing if I stay the same. There it was. Not punishment. Responsibility. He sat back, looking tired but steadier. I lost the marriage, he said. I lost the house. I lost a lot, and most of it was because I kept thinking someone else should absorb the cost. I asked him, why are you here now? He met my eyes. Because I want to fix what I can. That was the first real opening. Not to the trust. To the relationship. And for the first time in years I thought it might have one. Part 5. I did not forgive Ryan in one dramatic moment. That would have been false. Life does not turn that neatly, and trust certainly does not. What happened instead was slower, more honest. In some ways, harder, because rebuilding requires more from a person than breaking does. The day he came back to my house, I listened more than I spoke. Ryan told me he and Olivia were divorced. He told me the Scottsdale house was gone. He told me he was living in a rental apartment. At one point he said, I kept thinking I was one deal away from fixing everything. I asked, and were you? No, he said. I was one honest decision away, and I kept avoiding it. We pushed too far, he said, and when things got tight, we looked for someone else to fill the gap. I nodded once. You looked at me. He held the point. Yes. Then he said the thing I had probably needed to hear all along. You weren't a father to me in that moment. You were a bank account. The room went quiet after that. Not because it was cruel, because it was accurate. Tell me this. After everything, would you have believed him right away? I did not. Not completely, but I believed he meant what he was saying that day. That was enough to begin. I told him, respect is not restored by apology alone. He nodded. I know. It is restored by what you do next. I know that too. That conversation ended without a hug, without theatrics, without promises we had not earned. But before he left, I said, you can come by next week. He came by the next week. Then again after that. Sometimes we had coffee. Sometimes we talked for an hour. He asked about my life more than he used to. Not in the rushed way people ask when they are waiting to talk about themselves. He listened. He asked about work from years ago, about architecture, about how I managed money when I was younger, about Helen. One afternoon he said, do you think she knew I'd become like that? I answered as honestly as I could. I think she knew what could happen if nobody drew a line. He looked down at his cup. She drew it. Yes, I said. She did. That was not easy for him to hear, but by then he was hearing hard things differently. Not as attacks. As boundaries. That was progress. We never pretended the lawsuit had not happened. I would not allow that. And to his credit, neither would he. Once, a few months into our regular visits, he said, I still can't believe I filed those papers. I was standing at the counter rinsing out 2 coffee cups. I said, I can. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, fair enough. As time passed, the trust was discussed again. Not as a prize. As a condition. Ryan had turned 40 by then. The age requirement was no longer the issue. The question was whether the rest meant something. No bankruptcy. No lawsuits against family. Reconciliation with his father. He had once treated those terms as harsh. Now he saw what they were. A test of character. One evening he said, Mom wasn't trying to control me, was she? I shook my head. She was trying to protect you from your worst instincts. Did you ever hate me for it? That is the kind of question that requires care. I was angry, I said. Deeply. I was disappointed. I was embarrassed. I was hurt. He waited. But no, I said. I did not hate you. His eyes lowered. I'm glad. I added, that didn't make what you did smaller. I know. There were nights during the lawsuit when I thought the relationship might be over for good. Not because I wanted revenge. Because some damage changes how you see a person. Once trust breaks in a certain way, you do not restore it by wishing. You restore it by repetition. Consistency. Time. That is what Ryan gave me, eventually. Not perfection. Not some miraculous transformation overnight. Just steadier choices, quieter living, more discipline, less performance. He talked differently too. Not about what he deserved, about what he was responsible for. One afternoon, Ryan helped me sort old boxes in the garage. Inside one were some of Helen's papers, organized the way only she would have organized them. Neat labels. straight edges, careful handwriting. Ryan held one folder for a moment and smiled without humor. Papers again, he said. I looked at him. Yes, he nodded. Funny, isn't it? Papers nearly ended us, and papers may have saved me. He was talking about the lawsuit, the ruling, the trust. He was right. The papers had accused, exposed, defended, and finally instructed. They had become a record not only of conflict, but of consequence. I said, paper only says what people have already chosen. He considered that. Then I chose badly. For a while. He accepted that correction. For a while, he said. Eventually, the trust conditions were no longer a mystery to either of us. They were a mirror. Ryan understood that if the money came to him, it would not be because he had forced anyone's hand. It would be because he had finally become someone who could receive help without treating it as tribute. That distinction matters more than the amount. $500,000 can stabilize a life. It can also ruin one if it arrives before humility does. Helen knew that. By then Ryan knew it too. He stopped asking me for rescue. I stopped trying to solve lessons on his behalf. And in that space something real returned. Near the end of one visit, after we had been meeting regularly for quite a while, Ryan stood by the door and said, "You know, when you said no to the money, I thought you were abandoning me." I leaned against the wall and waited. He continued, "Now I think it was the first time you refused to abandon who I needed to become." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "That took you long enough." He laughed once, a small laugh. "Earned." "Yeah," he said. "It did." There was no grand ending. Just a father and son in a quiet house in Phoenix, speaking more honestly than they had in years. That was enough. Over time, Ryan lived with more maturity. He carried himself differently. The old hunger to look successful at any cost had thinned. The need to impress had been replaced, mostly, by the willingness to be steady. People sometimes ask me whether I regret refusing the $300,000. No, not for a second. If I had given in, I would have bought him one more reason to believe responsibility belonged to someone else. Instead, the truth cost him dearly. It cost me too. But in the end, it did what comfort never could. It made change unavoidable. I did not win by shouting. I did not win by punishing him. I won by holding a boundary and letting reality speak. So did Helen. That is why, when I think back on the day I opened those lawsuit papers at my dining table, I no longer see only betrayal. I see the start of the only honest path we had left. It was ugly. It was expensive. It was humiliating. But it forced the truth into the open. And once the truth was there, we could finally build on something that would hold. By then, both of us knew silence would solve nothing. Now Ryan and I meet regularly. We talk. We disagree sometimes. We remember Helen. We do not pretend the past was smaller than it was. We simply refuse to let it rule what comes next. My son once believed I owed him rescue. Now he understands that love without responsibility is just another way to fail a person. It took loss for him to learn that. It took restraint for me to teach it. And in the end, the relationship came back not because money solved anything, but because truth finally did. That was enough. It still is.